Welcome back. All right, today's history video, team history video, is on the Buffalo Sabres. The Buffalo Sabres, of course, have been in the midst of a rebuild for a while. It's been a long while. They haven't made the playoffs since 2011, and so patience has run short in Buffalo. We saw ticket sales way down, and there's various reasons for that, but there's definitely been some unhappiness with Buffalo fans, and it's understandable. You've gone through a rebuild process where it was meant to potentially draft McDavid, but you draft Eichel instead. Eichel has some good years, but the team does not. And Eichel's moved on, but there's some reason for hope right now in the Buffalo lineup. I don't know how much better they're going to get this year, but I think they should get better. They should absolutely get better. The problem is we've been saying that in previous seasons as well. So we'll see what happens this year. The all-time leading scorer is now, and probably forever will be, Gilbert Perreault. In 1,191 games played with Buffalo, 512 goals, 814 assists, 1,326 points. Hall of Famer, retired number, all that fun stuff. Dave Andreychuk, 837 games played, 368 goals, 436 assists, 804 points. Longtime Sabre, very successful. Rick Martin, 681 games, 382 goals, 313 assists, 695 points. Craig Ramsay, 1,070 games played, 252 goals, 420 assists, 672 points. I could see myself doing a Craig Ramsay career video at some point. He was one of the better two-way forwards in the 80s when there weren't very many two-way forwards. It felt like they were really the exception rather than the rule. Phil Housley first, 608 games played, 178 goals, 380 assists, 558 points. Now we get to Rene Robert, who played 524 games in Buffalo, ended up with 220 goals, 330 assists for 552 points. Don Luce played 766 games with Buffalo, 216 goals, 310 assists, 526 points. Jason Pominville, one of the more recent players on the board here, 733 games played, 217 goals, 304 assists, 521 points. Mike Foligno, 664 games played, 247 goals, 264 assists, 511 points for Mike. And then Danny Gare, who played 503 games with the Buffalo Sabres, 267 goals to go with 233 assists for 500 points. And Gare was a pretty dynamic forward early on in his career as well. Now, when we get into wins leader, that's why I'm wearing my Ryan Miller jersey, which, of course, people are going to mention how ugly this jersey, and I can't argue that it's not, but hey, Ryan Miller. So 284 wins for Miller. They're retiring his number this year. 234 wins for Dominic Hasek, 156 for Don Edwards, Marty Biron, 134, and Tom Barrasso with 124. It's always a surprise to me that Barrasso didn't get more wins in Buffalo, but he would move on to Pittsburgh where he got some wins there, including a Stanley Cup or two. Their retired numbers list is quite substantial. Number 2, Tim Horton, retired. Number 7, that's Rick Martin, been retired. Number 11, Gilbert Perreault. Number 14 of Rene Robert. Number 16 of Pat LaFontaine. Number 18 of Danny Gare. Number 30 of Ryan Miller's being retired this season. And number 39 for Dominic Hasek. So that's a lot of retired numbers. That's 8 retired numbers in total for the Buffalo Sabres. The playoffs list ends up being kind of a short one. And again, this is understandable. They haven't been in the playoffs since 2011. Going back to 2000, that was the season after the disputed Stanley Cup final goal scored by the Dallas Stars with Brett Hull skate in the crease. 2000, they lost in the first round against Philadelphia in 5. So any hopes of going back to the final and getting revenge went by the wayside there. 2001, they lose in the second round against Pittsburgh. That took 7 games. They didn't make the playoffs again until 2006. There they lost in the conference final in 7 games against Carolina. 2007, they go all the way to the conference final yet again, where they lost in 5 against Ottawa. And those back-to-back years were great for Buffalo. Then things kind of fall apart again. But 2010, they're back in the playoffs. They lose in the first round against Boston in 6. And then in 2011, the last time they've made the playoffs, as of the time I'm recording this video, they lose in the first round against Philadelphia. That takes 7 games. So that is 6 playoff appearances since the year 2000. And Buffalo was a team that I remember when I started watching hockey. They were pretty reliable at making the playoffs, pretty reliable at being pretty good as well, other than a couple seasons here and there. So there are no Stanley Cups for Buffalo. The Buffalo-Vancouver expansion, not allowed to win Stanley Cups. Sad but true. Their arena since 1997 has changed names, but KeyBank Center is what it's called now, and it replaced the Buffalo Memorial Auditorium. We all remember the Aud. Well, if you're old enough, you remember the Aud. It was a smaller building with a smaller ice surface, and it definitely gave an advantage to Buffalo. When they wanted to play a physical game, there was less room out there, and I do kind of miss that. When all the arenas became the same ice surface, I understood the NHL wanting it to all be uniform around the league, but it lost some of its personality. I remember at the time that there was a comparison with like baseball, where baseball diamonds are all different sizes and different areas. But I understand why the NHL standardized it. So now we don't have that home ice advantage for anybody like you would have had for Boston or for Buffalo, because their ice surfaces were smaller. In their coaching history, they've had 20 coaches. Punch Imlach was the first. He finished with a record of 32, 62, and 25 behind the Buffalo bench. Don Granato is their current coach. His record is coached 41, 55, and 14. It's not 500, but it's not awful either, comparatively speaking to some of the other coaching records over the last decade. 41, 55, and 14 is not as bad as some of the others. The first goal in the history of this franchise was actually scored by Jim Watson. That was at 5:01 of the second period in what would be a 2-1 win for Pittsburgh. Plus, their most recent goal was scored by Casey Mittelstadt at 2:07 of overtime in a 3-2 win against the Chicago Blackhawks. So they won their first game, they won their most recent game, there's no problem. Their all-time penalty minutes leader is Rob Ray with 3,189. He knew his job and he performed it well. Season records, Alex McGillney, 76 goals in 92-93. What a magical season 92-93 was for scoring. Assists, Pat LaFontaine, 95 that same year. So LaFontaine and McGillney, a little bit of chemistry there. Pat LaFontaine that season also set a points record of 148. I'm going to go out on a limb and say those three records are pretty safe. I don't see anybody for Buffalo scoring 150 points this year. I apologize for anybody who's putting money down that somebody's going to get 150 points for the Sabres, but I just don't see it happening. Penalty minutes, Rob Ray with 354. That was in 91-92. All-time wins in one season, Ryan Miller again, 41 of those in 2009-2010, which was a really good season for Ryan Miller, right? So their best draft picks, you can't overlook McGillney. Drafted 89th overall in 1988. 1972, drafting 85th overall, they draft Peter McNabb. Drafting 183rd overall in 1989 is Donald Audette. Drafted 156th overall in 1997 is Brian Campbell. Drafted 241st overall in 2002, Dennis Weidman. Long career in the NHL and being drafted, at 241, that's insane. Drafted 214th in 1983, Uwe Krupp, who would score a cup-clinching goal for the Avalanche many, many years later. 1999, drafted 138th overall is Ryan Miller, right here. 1975, drafted 89th overall is Don Edwards. And recently, 2012, drafted 163rd overall is Linus Ullmark, now one of the 1A, 1B tandem in Boston with Jeremy Swayman. First-round picks that have played less than 100 games. Well, famously, drafted 12th overall in 1973, Morris Titanic. Who would have thought that career would end up going down? 19 games. I apologize to the entire Titanic family. Number 17th overall in 1981 was Yuri Dudacek, who does not play a game in the NHL. Number 13 in 1988 was Joel Savage, who ends up playing 3 games in the NHL. Number 11 overall in 1992, David Cooper. He plays 30 games in the National Hockey League. Number 21 overall in 1997 was Mika Norrinen, who played 71 games. And Norrinen looked like he had a good future, and then just decided not to sign with the Canucks, and he never came back. Then 1999 drafted 20th overall, Barrett Heiston, who ends up playing 10 games. I thought it was Heistein up until now, and I'm looking like, no, there's no E, so it's Heiston. All right, number 15 overall in 2000, Artem Kryukov, who plays 0 games in the NHL. 2005 drafted 13th overall, Marek Zagrapan, one of the great names in hockey, did not make it to the NHL, played 0 games, played in the AHL though. Then 2006, drafted 24th overall, I should say, is Dennis Pearson, who played 0 games in the NHL as well. So for Buffalo, the draft's been an adventure over the years. Some hits, some misses. One that's famous, though, is the number 183 pick in 1974. So this is 11th round. You're not looking at anybody of major consequence. So they draft Taro Tsujimoto, Japanese player. First Japanese player taken in the draft in history, except he doesn't exist. That's right, the Buffalo Sabres. This was a protest by the Buffalo Sabres. It was a hoax because they were protesting that the NHL was doing the draft over the phone. They were doing it very slowly, and they were doing it so that the WHA didn't know who had been drafted. This is one of the many back and forths between the NHL and the WHA, and it's usually the NHL looking kind of small, kind of like they're picking on the little guys in the WHA with some of the things they were doing, but they didn't want to give up their hand at the draft, so they were keeping it quiet. So Buffalo got tired of the fact it was taking forever. We've seen drafts take forever in recent years, and so that's why Tsujimoto gets drafted. Now, eventually there will be a hockey card for the player who doesn't exist. That came out in 2011. It's become quite the folklore around Buffalo, but that's why they did it. It wasn't just a, hey, we're going to do this for fun. And the other interesting part is the NHL didn't realize that they had been duped for quite some time. And now if you look up the draft from 1974, it just says they didn't pick. Basically says they didn't pick. They don't put Taro Tsujimoto's name on there. And eventually Japanese players do get drafted in the NHL. We'd have a couple of them. I know there's been a goaltender that's played from Japan. But anyways, yeah, that was bizarre, and it was definitely one of those things that it feels like that would only happen in hockey, that they'd have a draft pick and go, let's just make somebody up. Let's do it. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.